Completing an APT, problems to be solved. When we complete an assessment and planning tool, we make 3 lists. First, the unhelpful or challenging behaviors. Next, the problems to be solved. And third, the thinking skills. In this video, we're going to talk about the second list, the problems to be solved. So what is a problem to be solved? That's a weird kind of term to use. The problem to be solved is when the challenging behavior happens. It's what led to the challenging behavior. So you can think about it in 3 ways. You can think about it as what was the tough situation, the situation that was really difficult for the youth and that led to the challenging behavior. Or was there a difficult expectation, an expectation that was hard for them to manage and led to the challenging behavior? Or was there some trigger that, dysregulated them and led to the challenging behavior? So any of those things, a tough situation, a difficult expectation, or a trigger can be problems to be solved. And these problems to be solved are our starting point for our intervention. So for a Plan B conversation, we're going to be addressing the problem to be solved, not the behavior. So it's really important. This is really the most important list on the APT because it leads us to our intervention. So how do we discover it? There are a few ways to discover problems to be solved. And it's not an either or. You can do all of these things to make a list of problems to be solved that's as rich as possible and gives you as many treatment targets as possible. So working backward from behaviors is one way to identify the problems to be solved. So you look at your challenging behaviors list and you ask yourself one by one, in what situations does this behavior happen? So let's look at an example. If the behavior on the behavior list is she isolates in her room, then I want to ask, in what situations is she isolating in her room? When does this happen, right? And so maybe we can understand that when she's not invited to a friend's house after school, she'll come home and isolate in her room. Or when the family's having a game night, she'll isolate in her room rather than joining in. Or when no one is liking her post on social media, she will find her isolating in her room. So those are 3 separate problems to be solved, 3 problems that could go on that problems to be solved list, and that we could have separate Plan B conversations about because they're all going to have a different kind of solution. So that's one way, looking, going backwards from the challenging behaviors. Another way to identify the problems to be solved is to kind of go through a typical day from wake up to bedtime and consider what are the expectations, what are the daily tasks, what's the routine, and when do things get rough for this kid, right? Consider the daily demands. And so, again, some examples. Let's think about what are the rough times of day for this particular youth? Well, getting dressed in the morning, there's often behavior around getting dressed in the morning. Getting to school on time. She's rarely getting to school on time. That's hard for her. And so that's an expectation that's rough. During lunch in the cafeteria, that can be a really hard time. So that particular situation, that particular time of day is hard. When she's asked to set the table for dinner, so that expectation of setting the table for dinner, that's a rough time. So again, all 4 of those things could go separately on our list of problems to be solved. A third way to identify the problems to be solved is to consider triggers. And just to think about what triggers this person, right? What are the things that happen that seem to be dysregulating to them? And thinking about people or, types of people, places, or, things that seem to set them off in some way. So again, let's think about examples. In our case, maybe some apparent triggers for this youth are when a peer says something mean about her hair. Anytime that happens, we see behavior, right? She kind of goes off. And so we know that that's a trigger. The loud, echoey sounds of the cafeteria at lunch seem to really bother her. So that's a trigger, that's a sensory trigger. When her parents praise her little brother, anytime that happens, she gets pretty upset. So we know that that's a trigger. And something about the math teacher's deep voice. When she hears his particular deep voice, that seems to be a trigger in some way. Maybe we don't know why these things are a trigger, but we can identify that they bother the youth, that they're a trigger. So again, all four of these things, problems to be solved, straight to the list. So if we were using this example, I think we had 3 and 4 and 4, so 11. So there's 11 problems to be solved on our list if we were using this information for an APT. So the typical first attempt at making a list of problems to be solved, especially when you're teaching a caregiver to do this, right? Or when you're initially doing it, when you first learn to do this, usually folks identify things that are way too general. We really want, so here's some examples, like peer conflict, right? So if we're asking, when does the youth have challenging behaviors? Oh, when there's peer conflict going on, or whenever they hear the word no. That's such a typical one that people say. Or when they're asked to do a chore, when it's chore time, or when it's homework time. And all of those things are pretty broad, right? And I can think of lots of, if I took one and thought of, okay, what are some examples? I could think of lots of different examples probably for each of those things. So what we really want to do is get specific. Our general problems to be solved, we have to drill down and get them as specific as possible, because with a specific problem to be solved, we can have a more targeted Plan B conversation and get a specific solution that's really going to work better than something more general. So, how do we do that? We use the situational analysis. That's our drilling down tool. And it can help us really break it down and think through, what are the specifics here. And so we ask, who's around, or when this thing is happening, when she hears the word no, who's telling her no, right? What's happening, what are they saying no about? Or is there some specific expectation that she's being given, or is there something that the youth is asking for? So what is a very important category here. It's kind of the meat of the problem to be solved. And then when is there a specific time of day, or time of day of the week? So when is really about time, and then where. And so is there a specific setting, or home or school, or mom's house, or that kind of thing, where this happens. And then of course in your essay you're exploring the whys. There's another tutorial that you can listen to that goes into the situational analysis a little more deeply. But for our purposes here of making this list of problems to be solved, the point I want to make is that the more information, the more who, what, when, and where information you have in a problem to be solved, the more specific it will be. So if you have all four of these elements, then it's a super specific problem to be solved. But if you have 2 or 3 of them, you're doing pretty well. So let's look at some examples of problems to be solved that are too general to start with, and then how could we, if we drilled down and got more information, get a more specific problem to be solved. So peer conflict, super general, right? So, asking those who are they having conflict with? What's the conflict about, right? When and where does it happen? We might get this. when a peer in his class calls him a sissy when they're shooting baskets in gym class. And so this has a peer in his class, that's the who. What is they call him a sissy. When is when they're shooting baskets, and that's kind of the a what too. It's kind of the situation in which it's happening. And then in gym class is the where. In gym class, I'm sure there's a time for gym class, so we could say on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 o'clock. So that has all those elements in it. That's a really specific problem to be solved. Let's look at some more examples. Hearing the word no, super general. When her mom says she can't go meet her friends downtown on Saturday, way more specific, right? So her mom is the who, saying she can't go meet her friends is the what, going downtown is the where, and then on Saturday is the when. When asked to do a chore, pretty general. When the caregiver asks them to make their bed in the morning before going to breakfast, way more specific, right? And we have the who, we have the what, and we have the when in that situation. Homework, really general. Completing the assigned math worksheet and turning it into the teacher the next day. So completing the assigned math worksheet is the what. That's the what is being asked of them, right? And turning it in is also a what. And then the next day is the when. So, turning it into the teacher the next day. So we have a lot of those elements in all 4 of those problems to be solved. And those are really great problems to be solved. I would love to see those on an APT. So with our APT that you find in Guidetree, your problems to be solved section looks like this. We're focusing on the left-hand side of it right now. But we're making sure, and the prompts are there on the sheet here, to consider the problems to be solved in all 5 systems. Just like you did with the behaviors, thinking about all 5 systems, we want to think about what are the problems at home, with peers, at school, and in the community. And then we also want to consider, are there problems to be solved for other family members, right? So mom, whoever the caregivers are, siblings, whatever it is, are there problems to be solved that they need to have help with as well? And if we do have those general problems to be solved, because we might not know all the specifics yet, that's okay. Put them on the list and then check that box where it says need to gather more specific info from others. You may need to do a situational analysis, right? You haven't done it yet, that's okay. Or you may need to talk to somebody, to the youth, to a caregiver, to somebody else, to gather more information to make a more specific problem to be solved. But with that box checked, we know that that's your intention. So hopefully that's been helpful, how to sort out what the problems to be solved are and get as specific as possible with those.